Old school NBA fans, self-research NBA facts, got another video for you. Let me just say, anybody who's supporting my channel, I appreciate it very much. Thank you. I was reluctant to even do this stuff. I want to do something a little different. I know a lot of people do, opinion-based narratives all the time. They have an agenda they're trying to push out there. And I know it looks like that, I'm this big, huge Michael Jordan guy and all that kind of thing, but I went where the facts took me. I did all the research. You can look at all my videos. There's about 30 or 30 some videos, and every one of them was just a different angle, and almost every one of them just happens to favor Michael Jordan. Please, in the comments, tell me an angle I should be looking at that I'm not, because I'm just not seeing it. Any other angle that doesn't tell me that Michael Jordan wasn't the greatest of all time. Now, somebody recently in the comments mentioned, why didn't Jordan win in the 80s? Well, I did a whole video on that, okay? It was more than just Boston or Detroit. These teams are red hot when they played the Bulls. They were just almost historically hot. I think Detroit in 89 or 90 won like 25 or 30 straight home games. I know the Boston won 30 straight home games before playing the Bulls. These teams are just almost unbeatable at home. And Michael Jordan wasn't even 500 until 1988. And in that year, he was the only real good player on his team. I don't even think there was anybody averaging over 11 points a game in that year. So he was basically doing it all by himself. He had an historic season even to get to 50 wins. And then in 89 and 90, his division was so stacked, and you had to play these teams 6 times. Cleveland and Atlanta and Detroit 6 times. So that kept the record lower because you're playing some of the best teams that are in your division. So anyway, it just never made sense to me. But what I want to address in this video is this whole watered down stuff that I've been hearing about how, the NBA was watered down in the 90s, expansion, blah, blah, blah. Maybe there's some truth to that in the very beginning of expansion, but after that, there really isn't. It's like any other year, in my opinion, any other era. I wanted to go over a couple things that I thought were interesting. Okay, for example, in 1975, there was 18 teams in the NBA. Okay, that was right before the merger. Only 2 teams had over 50 wins in the NBA. So there might not have been a lot of bottom-feeding teams, but there wasn't a lot of great teams either. 76, same exact thing. Only 2 teams over 50 wins out of 18. In 77, after the merger, 1 team over 50 wins out of 22. So again, may not be a lot of bottom feeders, but there's not a lot of top great teams either. You got 1978 had 3 teams over 50 wins, and 79, 2 teams over 50 wins. And that's in the late 70s. In the early part of the 80s, there was actually pretty good parity. That was a time in the NBA where there was some good teams and not a lot of bad teams. That was some really good parity in that time. But by the time, like the next year in 84, the East only had Boston as the only team to have over 52 wins. And the Lakers out west, there was no team over 48 wins out west in 84. So again, there may not have been a lot of, 16, 19, 21 teams, but there were no top heavy. It was not top heavy at all. 1985, the East had 3 teams over 46 wins. That's it. That was Michael Jordan's rookie year. The West only had 2 teams over 48 wins. So again, maybe not a lot of bottom feeders, but there wasn't a lot of top heavy either. Now, 1988 was a year that's interesting. This is before expansion. There was 8 teams with 50 plus wins in the NBA. Okay, so they were starting to get top heavy. There were some good teams, and that was 23 teams in the league. Only 2 teams under 20 wins at that time. Now, in 1989, that was the first year of expansion. That's when Miami and Charlotte joined the league. There were 7 teams with 50 plus wins, and there was 4 teams with under 20 wins. That was directly due to expansion. In 1990, and in 91. 90 is when Minnesota and Orlando came in. So now you got 4 expansion teams in there. Well, in 1990, 9 teams of 50-plus wins. Now you could say they were beating up on the expansion teams. But 1990 and 91, there were no teams with under 20 wins. All right? I just find that very interesting. In 92, 8 teams with 50-plus wins. Now, let's look at how many times in Michael Jordan's career were there more than 2 teams with less than 20 wins. 1990, when they had the expansion era, that would have been Orlando, Minnesota, Charlotte, and Miami. And in 1998, there was 5. And that wasn't even expansion. I think one of them was Vancouver, but it was like Dallas wasn't good. The Clippers weren't very good. So there was 5 total. So 1985 through 1998, only 2 years. 1990, 1998 was there more than 2 teams with less than 20 wins. 02 and 03 on the Wizards, 0 and 2. Now, look at LeBron James's tenure. So, expansion means what? There's a lot of bad teams, right? Okay. Well, in 05, there was 3 teams with less than 20 wins. 09, 2015, 2019. 4 years, there was more than 2 teams with less than 20 wins. Michael Jordan's 15 years, there was only 2 years where there was more than 2 teams with less than 20 wins. So I think that watered down expansion stuff gets blown out a little bit, blown out of proportion. There was also more good teams. There might have been some bottom feeders, but there was also top heavy as well. There was more 60-win teams in the 90s than any other decade. I think Sports and Fitness Rant said that the other day. So there wasn't as many like in the 80s when you had the 76ers and Boston and the Lakers, maybe Detroit in the late 80s that had 3, 4, 5 Hall of Famers on one team. Well, that wasn't good for the league anyway. It was only a couple teams that ever had a chance to win. Now, yeah, the Bulls didn't win in the late 80s. They didn't win a championship until 91. And you can say that, people got old or whatever. Well, after 87, Boston was done anyway. They never even got back to the Eastern Conference Finals after that. Well, I think in 88, actually, they did get back in 88. They got back to the Eastern Conference Finals and they lost to Detroit. But they were done anyway. It had nothing to do with that. And that was the first year the Bulls got any taste of success over 500. That was in 1988 when they were 50 and 32. Michael Jordan didn't have a teammate averaging over 11 points a game. The savior Scottie Pippen was averaging 7.9 points off the bench. Same with Horace Grant. They weren't doing anything. And in 89, the Bulls were actually up 2-1. They beat the 57-win Cavs and the 52-win Knicks, and they were only a 47-win team. So they overachieved in 89. No, they didn't beat the Pistons, but nobody could beat the Pistons. Go look at the playoffs. No, the other 3 rounds that Detroit played, including the finals, nobody beat Detroit even 1 game. That's why I say these teams were historically good. This wasn't just like, just some normal team. This wasn't like the 2011 Mavericks or the 2014 Spurs or the 2006 Miami Heat. No, these teams were almost impossible to beat. 1990, they lost 5 total games in the playoffs. The Bulls gave them 3 of them. Now, Scottie Pippen in Game 7 had a migraine headache, whatever that was, whether, he embellished it or he was legitimate, whatever the reason there, he didn't play, okay? But they were tied 3-3. The Bulls were right there. And they certainly were going to beat Portland in those finals had they broken through in 90. There's no doubt in my mind. But this whole expansion era, this watered down stuff, it's just crap in my mind. You look at some of these teams, these expansion teams. By 1993, Charlotte was 44 and 38. They had Alonzo Mourning and Larry Johnson. They already drafted Armin Gilliam, I think. Miami was in the playoffs in 92. Orlando was 500 because they just got Shaq. So all these expansion teams, the exception of maybe Minnesota, they were all right in the mix with everybody. By 95, Orlando was in the finals with a 57-25 record. Charlotte was a 51-31 team. Miami, they were regressing a little bit, but look at their record at 96 and 97. You know, they got Tim Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning and P.J. Brown and Dan Marley and all those other, Rashawn Leonard, Jamal Mashburn, good teams there. So, you know, within 6, 7, 8 years, these teams are right in the mix, you know, competing. 60-win teams, a couple of 96, Orlando won 60 games. 97, Miami won 61 games. So these expansion teams, yeah, it took a few years for them to catch up, but they were competitive almost right away. And with all the international players that were coming in the league, the 80s hardly had any at all. But the 90s, there was, you know, Dino Raja and Drazen Petrovic and Vlade Divac and Arvydas Sabonis, Tony Kukoc. I mean, there was several, you know, international European players. It's just now, in today's NBA, the international players are just better than the Americans are right now. You know, there's not a ton of great American players. But this watered-down business, again, I look at it on paper, I don't see it that way. Hell, one year, I want to say it was 2012 or 13, Miami Heat had Charlotte Bobcats in their division. I think that was in 2012 because they played 66 games. They were 9-59 in your division. So they got a feast on that all year. But anyway, I just think this whole watered down thing's a bit overblown. There is some truth to it, maybe initially in the first year or two when expansion takes hold. But by the time, you know, the Bulls were winning their championships, the expansion teams were some of the teams they were playing all the time. You know, how many times do you think they played Miami in the playoffs from 91 to 98? They played Miami 3 times. They played Charlotte twice, and they played Orlando twice. That's who they were playing. And most of the time, it was deep in the Eastern Conference Finals or whatnot. So, again, I just never really bought into this whole watered-down thing. No, it wasn't like the 80s, but neither was the 70s. The 70s wasn't stacked, having 4 and 5 Hall of Famers on a team. That was just the 80s for a stretch. But it's not really been like that before or since. But look at the super team era. How is that not worse, really? Because now you're sucking out the best players on some of these teams and putting them all on one. You know, like what LeBron did. You weakened Toronto and Bosch went off, and then you weakened Cleveland by him leaving. So there's 2 teams right there that have been weakened, and you know they weren't very good after those moves. And then later on, Kevin Durant, he weakened Oklahoma City. You know, they went from contending to, you know, a bottom playoff team basically. They got weak when he joined Golden State. It's the same thing when, you know, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant all joined up. You don't think they weakened their teams when they left? Of course they did. That's what the super team era does, you know. I mean, Russell Westbrook left the Wizards. You know, the guy was averaging 11 point something assists a year. He leaves Washington. They're finished. They're one of the worst teams in the NBA now. Just saying, that's what happens when all these super teams join up. You weaken the other teams. That's what happens. So it's just in a different way, but it's ultimately about the same thing. You know, you're pulling the best players on fewer teams, and then the rest of the teams are fighting for what's left over. Not too much different than expansion, but at least in expansion, you get the top picks, and you can build. You know, you can build from there. You know, like Orlando getting Shaq and Penny, like Charlotte getting Alonzo Mourning and Larry Johnson. I mean, you know, it's done through the draft. You know, most of the time, the people, I think they're allowed to protect 10 players on each team, and then you can take off of some other team or whatever, but it all evens out in the end. To think that the whole decade was watered down, that's just not true. It's ridiculous, and it's a stupid narrative. And like I said, I just showed you that there was more teams with less than 20 wins in LeBron's era than in Michael Jordan's era, the alleged watered down expansion era. So anyway, that's it for this video. I just wanted to put this out. It was kind of bugging me that this is even out there. But again, nobody questioned this stuff until LeBron fans came along. Michael Jordan is in LeBron's way. So they know they can't move his resume out of the way. So you have to try to chip away at discrediting the resume. That's all you have left to do. You can't move the resume because it's set in stone. So you got to try to chip away, you know, and try to bring Michael Jordan down. And look, if there's another player who comes along who's undeniable, somebody, you know, wins 4 championships in a row, wins 6 or 7 MVPs, a bunch of all defenses, clearly the best player of all time. I'll admit it, no problem. I don't have to have this loyalty to Michael Jordan. It's just nobody is better. Not on paper, not on video. Please, bring me somebody I can use. Not LeBron James. Bring me somebody who stacks up, please. I haven't seen him yet. Leave it in the comments by all means. Who's the player I should be looking at that compares to Michael Jordan? I'm all ears, please. All right, until next time.